And then just like probably 10 seconds into it, I realized that I'm just peeing on the floor.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 112 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the level 9 auto mage.
I'm Sam and I'm the nudist.
And today is August Doubletooth 2017. Is also the name of an assassin.
August Doubletooth.
Yeah. Before we get started, we have a warning. Anything can happen on this show. There's going to be profanity. If you're a child, get out of here. Just get your...
Go play with your ball in the corner.
Go play with a stick outside. All right, gentlemen. This week there was an eclipse.
It was incredible.
We eclipsed.
So we took we rented a van, which metamorphosed into a huge SUV at Enterprise because they gave us an upgrade.
Upgrade.
Quote unquote
gave.
So yeah, right. It's $20 more, but whatever. So this was a kind of a funny situation. So we originally rented a minivan to take the whole Butterscotch crew. We're going to drive south of St. Louis 1 hour because that put us sort of straight in the line of what's called the totality of the eclipse, which is where the moon completely blocks the sun, and it's very crazy.
And the more in the middle of it you are, the longer you get to see
for like a minute and a half or two.
Yeah. So it was for where we were, it ended up being, I think, 2 minutes and 25 seconds or something. It was basically somewhere near the maximum amount of time that was available to see it. So we rented a van, and the goal was just to be able to sort of, get everybody in one car to have it be like this fun road trip sort of experience. But we also we probably way overdid it in terms of bringing snacks.
Many snacks.
Well, I think we just underate.
What are the two?
We had enough snacks. We just didn't. We only ate like a eighth of them.
Right. But so one thing I think we didn't quite sort of fit into the mental model was how much space all the snacks would take up versus all the people in the car and how much trunk space we would need. So they showed me the van when I got to Enterprise to rent it. And I was looking at it and I was like, this is nice. And he's like, I have this one over here too, which was this huge, beefy, it's like a luxury SUV. I can't remember the name of it. Some fancy car.
And apparently luxury just means infinite legroom for
very specific people. So this is the funny thing. So I get it. And I'm like, so it did have basically the same. I think the van had maybe a slightly more trunk space, but not much. And otherwise, it was much more roomy in this SUV. And we were anticipating being trapped in traffic for a very long period of time yesterday.
It's like, we're going to need
which
space.
Happened. Right. So we're like, let's need space. And of course, I didn't go sit in the back seat because I just figured if it's a luxury SUV, back seat has legroom. But so we go bring the car back, get everything packed in, and then everybody piles into their various seats. We come to find that when it's a luxury SUV, really what that means is that the pilots of the vehicle are doing great. They got, lots of space, tons of leg room, just all this stuff going on. And it's sort of like a
trickle down kind of
first class coach and then like
cargo
hold so the people in the middle of the car had plenty of leg room still, doing great. And then as soon as you get back,
there wasn't even a middle seat in this like the passenger row either. There was just a giant console.
You get armrest, get cup holders, and then as soon as you get to the back seat, it's like steerage. So they're sort of slammed up against it, and the trunk space was sort of infringing on their personal bubbles.
And they've got headrests in the middle of their back for some reason.
Yeah, and the thing was, and the seat was really hard. Like, I mean, if it was concrete with a blanket on it, that would have felt probably exactly.
It was more like an artist's rendition of a seat, more so than a real seat.
So we traveled to go see the eclipse yesterday. I
think there is a good metaphor there, though, about like, luxury and wealth and and kind of the selfishness of and like the non-observance of the lower kind of case.
Throw the plebes in the back seat on the concrete chairs with no leg room.
Yeah. So I think, part of feeling luxurious is certainly putting other people in a lower class spot.
I think
I felt like a king yesterday.
I think that's a lot of what they're selling actually is that sort of visible difference between you and the other people.
Yeah. And actually in the middle seat, there was so much room that I kind of had to shout in order for the people in the front and the back to hear me. So I kind of feel like I suffered because my voice got hoarse.
We had a full, king sort of merchant class and peasant class all slammed in one car. Yeah. So it was great. But yeah, so basically Adam and Andy and Sher's butts fell asleep or off. I think some butts were lost.
They fell asleep first, and the problem there is that you can then not tell if they've fallen off or not.
Right. You just kind of lose your butt.
Yeah.
So, but we went and saw the totality, and that was one of the craziest things I think that any of us have probably ever seen. So, basically what happens is, I mean, during the eclipse, it's kind of whatever, because you can't actually tell an eclipse is happening.
Because you can't look at it or you go blind.
You can look at it or you go blind. You actually, if you look at it just with your eyes, even if you were able to look, you wouldn't be able to see what was happening.
Even with
1%
1% of the sunlight coming through.
Yeah, it looks like a daytime
you're
situation.
still blinded.
And so basically what happened was, so we would look up at it for like an hour and a half, and you just kind of see.
With eclipse glasses
right,
on.
with our glasses on, and you would see just sort of the moon kind of getting in the way. But it was still very bright. It's kind of whatever.
But yeah, but
It was
also
hot. Felt like broad daylight.
But also all you're seeing is just a light in the shape of a crescent.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, who gives a fuck?
So who cares?
about light in
Still
the shape of a
incredibly
crescent?
blinding.
But then, but the crazy part is when the totality actually happens, then the whole thing, the nature of the whole thing just shifts. And I don't know if it happened to you guys, but like, so the moon goes in front of the sun completely. And as soon as that happens, then the whole world gets dark.
It's like nighttime.
It's like nighttime.
It's like it's not like pure night because it's
like a dusk.
It's like right
Like a
after
deep
sunset.
dusk.
Because if you look on all the horizons, you can see it looks like a sunset because it's still light miles and miles and
Right.
miles away because you're just like in this little area.
Right. But so everybody took off their glasses in this area we were in, and you're just staring up at this. It's just a pitch black hole that looks like in the sky
With
with white light
fire
shooting out of
around
it. One of the most horrifying things. Like there's this, I don't know if it happened to you guys, but a brief moment of just deep panic where you're like, what is happening?
This is not correct.
And you could hear, I mean, everybody, we went to a park to go watch it, Missouri State Park, and everybody started screaming immediately. Of course, there's like, ah!
I think it's sort of, it talks right to your animal brain.
It really does. It was freaky.
I can totally understand how. So, but on Friday or on Thursday, Andy gave us a presentation about the eclipse, and because he did a bunch of research on it, and he was sort of the big push behind us doing this trip to go see it. And he was talking about how in not even ancient times, but even like in the 1700s and stuff like that.
Recently, yeah.
Yeah, where we knew people were able to predict eclipses, astronomers were, but still for common people who don't understand anything about that stuff, they would have this sort of unbelievable panic and terror, and like people would start looting, and there's just all kinds of stuff. And so a big part of being an astronomer at that time was being able to inform the royalty that, hey, there's going to be this eclipse. It's a totally normal thing.
It's fine.
Nothing to worry about. It's just the moon going in front of the sun, right? And so that way the royalty could then sort of spread word to everybody saying, hey, there's this event going to be happening. Don't
worry
panic
about
and
it.
kill everybody, right? And there were occasions where the astronomers would miscalculate,
Yeah.
and they would. And then
Or the one that Andy told us about was in one of the Chinese dynasties was some Chinese astronomers did predict it, but then got drunk afterwards because they were like celebrating the night before the eclipse was going to happen, and forgot to start the ceremony in the morning to like let everybody know that this is happening today. And so everyone lost their minds, and then they got beheaded because of their error. Whoopsies. So
things used to be of more consequence back then, I guess.
for sure. But yeah, it was a really cool event. So and I know there's pictures flying all over the place, but I think it was very true that actually being there and seeing that sudden everything's fine, and then suddenly there's just a black hole in the sky was very different than just looking at it in any sort of pictured sense, I think. So there's another one in 7 years that actually comes by St. Louis again, goes to Carbondale, Illinois, which would be about an hour east of here, which I think we're definitely going to go do. We made a little time capsule with a bunch of sort of goals and stuff for the studio, and we'll crack that open. Andy made it out of PVC pipe, so it looks like a pipe bomb, actually. I think more than anything else.
You just have Butterscotch Shenanigans sticker logo on it. So, yeah. And I kind of felt bad because I talked to Adam afterwards, and Adam was like, I don't know if that was worth it. And I was like, why? He's like, well, I can't remember what it looked like.
Yeah, I have no memory of it happening now.
Adam has no visual memory. So,
Yeah, because it's particularly important because it's a short event, and most of the whole event is you just not really giving a shit because you're just looking looking at a crescent light through a thing that only allows you to see just a crescent, which you can just manufacture that out of anything, just looking around, right? So actually, to me, the coolest part of the whole thing was just like the sensation of it getting dark.
That was weird.
And
in the middle of the day.
Yeah, and I have a sort of a vague recollection of that sort of, I don't know, just general
Vibe
and impact, But I can't like picture in my brain any of the stuff that actually happened, or like what the way that the sun looked like, or any of that. So then afterwards, I was just like, no, I'm just kind of Like, it was cool, but it was also really hot.
It was
very hot.
We just sweated from like 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.
I'm pretty sure we're all dehydrated. We all get in the car to head home, and everybody drank probably a liter of water before a 3-hour car ride to get home. And nobody
I was sweating.
peed.
Yeah, I was sweating so much that I drank 3 liters of water during the whole trip, and I didn't have to pee at all. Even when I got back home, I'm just losing water.
Yeah, it's very dangerous.
So that was gross. Hey, speaking of peeing.
Oh God.
Sam had an incident that we need to talk
All right. So I'm just going to preface this. So I do occasionally share stories about, incidents, terrible things that have happened to me. I try to do it as sort of a fable. So you take a lesson from it, maybe apply it to your own life. Don't make mistakes that I did.
Don't follow the follies of Sam.
So I'm gonna open up here, be a little vulnerable. That happened to me a couple days ago. So one of my habits I've been trying to break is that sort of really frustrating habit that I think probably a lot of us have, which is when you go to the bathroom, you take your phone with you, right? And then this will elongate a journey to the bathroom from what should be probably 2 minutes to like 30. Your legs are numb, you stumble off, and then you like fall down the stairs and break something. So I've been trying to get away from that, and then also just kind of get away from the phone in general. And I've been doing pretty good. But then on Saturday afternoon, I was waiting for an email back from my oncologist about an upcoming trip that I'm going on. And so as I'm walking between rooms, I was like, let me just check this real quick. And with the, of course, thought being, it's not going to be here, but I'm just going to look at my phone because, that's how people do. And pop it open. And of course, there is actually an email in there. Now I'm en route to the bathroom right now. So, the decision's been made as to whether I'm going to be on my phone. Like I have my phone.
I mean, you got to read that email right
now.
Like there's no possible way that you could have waited until afterwards.
So I walk into the bathroom and I'm just reading, take off the pants, sit down, start doing the business and just keep on reading this email. And then just like probably 10 seconds into it, I realized that I'm just peeing on the floor. Okay, so this happened 2 days ago. I'm a 27-year-old man. Just peed all over the, and I don't know how the physics was even working for this because like I was just sitting there. So I don't know if because again, probably because I wasn't paying attention, if I had like perched sort of like on the edge of the seat. I don't know what's happening, but
you just oriented just so.
Right. And so, there's a focusing problem. I'm just reading the attentional blindness. Right? I'm just reading this email while peeing out.
Yeah, it's a fable about multitasking. And the dangers of if you try to do 2 things at once, everything's just going to get covered.
You can't even pee and read at the same time. You can't. There's that old saying about walking and chewing bubble gum.
Yeah, you can't pee and read. Also, don't try it. Don't risk
try
it.
it.
Doesn't matter how easy and natural it seems. Can't do it.
Man, one time of that, and you're just like, "What is wrong with me? Why am I like this? What's my issue?" So I try to take the lesson, take it to heart. Don't be like me.
Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect.
Sometimes. No, we don't need to belabor the point. I hope you learned something, Sam.
I certainly did. God, hope no one else pees on the floor. Get out of here.
And speaking of accomplishments, we had a big benchmark last week. Crashlands surpassed the 500,000 unit sales mark.
I never thought I'd see a graceful segue from peeing on the floor to sales milestone.
Well, we did it.
We crossed the 500,000 units mark.
A lot of those were thanks to various bundles and things where we managed to offload a lot of units for cheap. Like 80 cents a piece. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, it was kind of cheating, I guess. But they weren't given away for free, though. So.
We did cheat, but we did make it.
Mm-hmm. So we still have, so 47% of our units came from iTunes in total. Yeah. And I think it's 37 maybe or something like that came from Google Play, and then the rest from Steam. So, and then revenue-wise, it kind of breaks down. Steam actually ends up taking quite a bit of the revenue pie versus what the total units were, of course, because it's more expensive on that platform. But in order to celebrate, we also we both dropped the price on Steam from $15 to $10.
Permanently. Forever.
So we'll see.
Yep.
We'll see what that does. And then we put it on sale on mobile as well, which has been going really well. So the game's out there. Of course, if you have friends who haven't actually played it yet, now's the time to get in on that. So
yeah, it's cheaper.
It's cheaper.
And it's still awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We also have 2 more news items before we get to questions. One is someone sent us 5 pounds of Coca-Cola flavored gummies.
Yeah.
Who was it?
They didn't have a note.
There was no note in there?
No, there was a note. There was a note.
It was like a receipt thing, but it didn't say, or like a little gift note,
Oh,
but
it
it didn't say a
signed.
name. So we have no
Oh,
idea.
no, it was straight from Amazon?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, somebody
So there's
shipped
no
Coca-Cola
return address
gummies.
or anything.
Very suspicious, first of all.
So naturally, we ate them.
Yeah, but we also Googled it first because we've all heard. I mean, we live on the internet, so we've seen that all those reviews of that one particular brand of gummy that like
The
apparently-
sugar-free gummies that are on Amazon.
that apparently it's like a bowel cleansing device more so than anything. so we initially got this bag and we sent a picture back to Seth, I think, actually.
Yeah.
Here it says like, oh God, like don't eat those yet. I need to Google this.
We gotta double check. But really, I think it's the sugar-free gummies. It's because of the sugar-free
Whatever the components
sweetener.
are.
Yeah. Which in general, sweetener, if you have it in large quantities,
It's a laxative.
it's just a turbo cleanse. It will liquefy your insides.
So thanks to whoever sent us those, and they are not the laxative ones, thankfully. So we did get to enjoy them.
Thankfully or not, I mean, I don't know.
Depends.
I could use a good cleanse. I mean,
Could have been good either way.
So thanks a bunch for sending those to us, whoever it was.
Did we
Yeah.
eat them all?
No way. There's 5 pounds.
I don't know where they are.
went.
Yeah, I don't know where they are
They-
right now.
We ate a bunch of them.
we might have eaten
Eat
them all.
already?
That'll be
But
incredible.
yeah, so if anybody does want to throw some candy our way or whatever,
Especially because we also ate at least 2 pounds of Cadbury mini eggs last week.
we did do this. Yeah, we discovered that you could just order a 5-pound container of Cadbury mini eggs off of Amazon. So the world will never be the same. Also, I realized we've been talking a lot about eating candy and measuring it in pounds lately. This might be a healthy trend. But yeah, if anybody does want to send us whatever, this came over to our mailbox, which you can find at mailbox.bscotch.net.
Yeah, you can also just send us like a note. You don't have to send us 5 pounds of candy.
But,
the only thing we've
I
gotten so
mean-
far is various huge candy items, which it's
Which
good.
is good.
But I think you guys are slowly trying to kill us like a little bit here, you know?
Kill us with kindness.
Diabetes.
And we also have started making a big push for this podcast.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about this because I think it's really interesting. We started this podcast like 2.5 years ago
Yeah.
as kind of a means of maintaining more consistent contact with our players over time, like because, you know, as developers, our focus is a lot more on the development side of things. And we've also started picking up steam in terms of having a lot of other developers listen to our podcast. And so it kind of started to hit a point where I think around the launch of Crashlands, we were just getting like 100 listens per episode or something like that. And then after the launch of Crashlands, that bumped up to something like 1,000 listens per episode.
It was actually 2,000 for a while.
For a little while, yeah. And then, of course, not everybody's going to stick around, as with all things. And so that kind of tapered off to about 1,000 consistent listens. But we never really did anything to try to optimize the reach or sort of the publicity of the podcast.
Or even really like decide who the target audience was or anything.
Yeah. So we basically did no marketing. We were just like, we think this is important for us to be able to reach people. And so we now have 100, what is episode 112? So we're 112 episodes in. So as of last week, we thought, what if we tried?
So some of you may have gotten, there's about 140 people or so who got an email. These are people who filled out the podcast survey, which was really important to us to kind of see what the actual value of this was to people and kind of what people are interested in. So those people who filled that out, we sent them an email because the first thing we're trying to do here, and something you can actually help us with if you're a listener and a fan of the show, is to go to iTunes and give us a review. So the way that we're going to do this, and I basically did a ton of research on podcast marketing and all this stuff last week, and kind of came to the conclusion that, you know, unless we want to turn this into another job for one of us, which we don't, the best way to move forward is to actually approach this in a lot of the same ways that we've approached the way that we market and PR our own games, which largely has to do with sort of building up social proof and then delivering a really concise pitch to a new audience that might be able to pick that up and run with it. So in this case, what we're going to do, the first goal is to hit basically 100 reviews on iTunes, because the weirdest thing about it is that for podcasts in particular, there are no visible tracking mechanisms for how popular a podcast is.
Yeah.
Aside from subscriber count, aside from review count. So in other words, it could be the case, and actually probably is the case, that there's a lot of podcasts that have, say, thousands and thousands of subscribers, but if those subscribers don't actually rate the podcast on iTunes,
it looks like nobody's listening.
It looks like no one's listening, and essentially, it can kind of not. It works against the value of the podcast overall, the spread of it. So our first goal is actually to hit 100 reviews. It's arbitrary, but it's triple digits, which is why we think maybe that's important to kind of get over that and be seen as something that matters in a sense. So we also optimized a bunch of the imagery and stuff, and I think Adam and I took like a whole day basically last week to just kind of fix up all this SEO stuff and all these things that we were just doing wrong. We also got the podcast put on all these different directories, including TuneIn. So if you have an Alexa, or I think it's like most cars now, like all sorts of weird stuff.
Yeah, most things like the Google little weird thing that sits in your house and you talk to it. Yeah. I think that's the name. Yeah.
Google Golem.
The Google weird thing. Like that thing uses TuneIn. Alexa uses TuneIn. So this is the radio, internet radio / podcast app that like every robot uses.
Right. So we weren't actually on it. We weren't on most things that people pay attention to. So all that's been remedied. And then once we get this first initial review, sort of push finished, then what we'll do is leverage it. Leverage the fact that we can say, hey, we have this highly rated, well-rated cast on iTunes, and then send that to a few of these different podcasting apps and use them because some of them have featuring that they allow. So if you use Pocket Cast to listen,
Podcast Addict,
Overcast, those are just a few of them. And so what we'll do is sort of pick one at a time and just go through and try to get another batch of listeners and then do another review push, sort of keep this thing going until we can essentially pitch to, iTunes, where apparently 80% of listens basically come from, and say, hey, can you put us on like the front page for something and show people that we
because one thing we also learned as we were digging through all these different stores is if you go over to Apple Podcasts, the podcast app on your iPad or whatever, if they only show you like 12 podcasts at a time.
There's a strange amount of white space on that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, when you try to look stuff up on there, you're only going to see the top handful of things for any given category or section or whatever.
Right.
And so either you get featured and you're there and you get the exposure, or you're at the top and you're fine. But if you're outside of those top 12, then
someone has to know exactly what they're looking for.
Someone has to search for exactly your thing.
Yeah. So if you've been listening to this podcast, even for just a couple episodes, and you do genuinely enjoy it, then definitely take some time either right after this cast or even just later today to go to, we provided a bit.ly for it. So if you go to bit.ly/CwB Apple, so coffee with butterscotch apple.
CW Bapple.
Double bap. Go to that and or just find it on iTunes and give us a review. And the weird thing is that the iTunes store also doesn't aggregate across the world. So we do have a lot of listeners across the world. And so you might see only like 5 or 10 reviews in your area. We're at we're at, I think, like 38 or so in the US, which is sort of where we're trying to get that number up to 100. So definitely go leave us a review and we'll see if we can grow this thing a little bit together. We don't have any plans to actually do ads and stuff on here.
And actually,
so don't worry about that.
We've removed the ads from our YouTube channel.
So don't worry about the idea that if you help us grow it, that we're just going to start shoving ads in your face. Probably not going to happen. We'll see what happens. But
yeah, well, because we also realize that the podcast we've come to understand its real value for everybody who's listening and also for ourselves, which is that it's sort of like a force multiplier, right? So it allows us to take these deep dives into all the things that we're trying to accomplish as a studio and explore them and talk to our players and fans about it as well. And so it's just a cool thing that we get to dive into every week. So having ads in it doesn't really it's not, the podcast doesn't exist to make money. So
correct.
It has a whole bunch of other purposes. So that's what we're doing. So we'll kind of report probably next week and talk about how it's going. Hopefully we just get those 100 reviews and then we're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's get on to some questions. And these questions come from podcast.bscotch.net. And if you want to get your question on future podcast, hop on over there and ask us a question. First question comes from Matrone. Hey, yo, guys. I'm currently working on a space survival game and would love to have Flux as a cameo character. Would you be okay with that? Any terms and conditions? Can you or can you not? That is the question.
We can also not. It depends. So I think we've done this actually, twice now?
Twice.
So a game called Cards and Castles. Flux is a hero in that game as well. So that's a card game. And then a game called Looty Dungeon, where Flux is a hero in that one as well. He has special moves and stuff. So anything like this, and this is just a general interesting point about licensing, is reaching out to the dev to just ask kind of if they would be willing to include it, what the licensing agreement might look like. and then what sort of stipulations come attached to that is just sort of the way to go. So I say just send us a contact note, and we'll sort of we can work through the details on the down low, because we can't say blanketly what the answer is.
Yeah, because it really it depends on the execution and the implementation, right? So, because one important note is if we have one of our characters appear in somebody else's game, then one of our criteria is we want to be able to review that and review all the dialogue that the character might say and the kinds of things that they might do, because the last thing we want is to have a character that we've been sort of cultivating that character's persona and appearance and everything like that, and then have somebody else just make it do all kinds of crass or horrible things that makes us look bad, right? So not that you would do that. This is just in general. Everybody else would do that, of course. So that's what the policy's there for.
Yeah. So in general, for us, and what you should expect for also most other people who are making their IP, is if you want to use it, even just sort of for fun, for a thing that you're making that you might not even be selling, you still actually need to reach out and ask for a explicit license agreement. And that license agreement might just say, yeah, feel free to use it for your game. That's cool. That might be the end of the agreement. But depending on who it is and what exactly the thing is that you're making, it might have additional terms, like how long it can be used, what happens if it becomes commercial, and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yeah, we're pretty open about it, so just ask.
Yeah.
Privately.
Yeah.
Yeah, go to contact.bscotch.net and fill out a form there.
Yeah. Our next question also comes from Matron. GameMaker iOS export looks a lot less straightforward than Android, with a heavy upfront setup and registration process.
Yes.
Do you guys care to share some tips, if there are any? Did you guys actually have to buy a Mac?
Yep.
As the Yo-Yo Games help page requires?
That was one of the weirdest realizations we had, because it was, I think, the first month and a half when we were making Tau Fight 2.
I think it was when we were making Gerblins.
Was it Gerblins when we did it?
Yeah, we had that Mac around the time that we founded the studio.
Oh, the Mac Minis?
The Mac,
back when they had those things?
Because
the Mac cost, that was a third of our entire capital.
We each put $500 in the bank to start the company. We had a bunch of old monitors and keyboards and shitty computer parts lying around. And so our options were get a low-end Mac for $1,500, which was our entire bank account, or get a Mac Mini, which had the same specs as a bad Mac laptop, but just no monitor, for $500, and then just slap all our old shitty computer parts onto the Mac Mini. So that's what we did in order to do our first round of everything. Actually, we had that Mac Mini even up through Crashlands.
Yeah, we used it for Crashlands.
And actually, during the launch week of Crashlands, once we saw that the game was actually doing well, we're like, oh, thank God. So the first thing we did was we drove over to the Apple store and got two high-powered Mac laptops, because the builds, to make builds for Crashlands on that Mac Mini, it was like a 25-minute compile process.
And now it's
what a nightmare.
It's like a minute now.
It's like a minute. Yeah. So
also there was that Wi-Fi problem where it would also just kick off the network because it required a network connection.
Yep.
So basically what happens is you have to use GameMaker to talk through the network to the Apple device to make it build the game for
via
you.
Xcode.
Via Xcode, which is why this is completely not
GameMaker,
and this all does make sense, and this is not GameMaker's fault.
No, yeah,
right.
this is just how it works.
I
believe this is how it works in Unity as well.
I mean,
you can't make a Mac build
not on a Mac.
Not on a Mac. Yeah. And so,
but it's the same with Linux too, right? If you want to make a Linux build, you have to also pipe it to a Linux machine.
Yeah. So we did instead for that is we got a virtual Linux machine to boot.
Yeah, it just is easier with Linux because you can just put Linux on Windows.
Yes.
On the same machine.
Yeah.
So, what you got any pro tips for handling that?
Well, the pro tip, I mean, really, it just as with a lot of things, having better equipment is ideal. By having the Mac Mini, we had the problem of it's a tower, quote, it's a tiny tower, but it's a tower. And so anytime we wanted to make Mac builds, we had this stationary computer that we had to go to make the builds because we have a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and a tower.
And so GameMaker didn't have an automatic build pipeline, so we couldn't just have a server running and say go.
And so it was even the case that when we were on launch day, we brought the Mac Mini and all the parts over to Sam's apartment, and we were pounding out builds at the last minute to fix things. Now that we have the laptops, oh my God, so much easier. We can bring it wherever we go. We can make Mac builds wherever we need to. So that's been the best thing. Not skimping on power. But again, I mean, in our case and in a lot of people's cases, it was we didn't have the cash to get Macs are expensive as
Well, also,
hell.
I mean, it was just actually a tremendous amount of trial and error to get it to work in the first place, to get the build to happen.
Well, the real problem was that it just took so long to build it with the bad processor that it was enough time for the network connection to time out. And so,
Whoa.
so it would be like, it was like a 20-minute build, and at like minute 15, like all of a sudden the connection drops and then comes back. But that's just enough for it to just screw up the build.
Yeah, my bet is that you can't even buy a bad enough Mac today to
replicate
that. But if you're using an old one, if you're using an old one though, you might.
Yeah,
still
because
run
we
into that
got
problem.
we got a bad Mac in 2012.
Yeah,
which was 5 years ago. So it was like a 5-year-old,
right.
piece of equipment. So it's like a decade now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a pain. But on the plus side, once you get everything down, then you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
So once you get the process ready, so
yep. I think you can use something like Process Street or whatever, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, just to
make a checklist.
There are still and especially I think because GameMaker doesn't have any sort of build pipeline stuff in it yet, although it is on the roadmap. So hopefully that comes out. But because of that, every time you're going to make a build for their platform, it's just as a multi-step process that you have to make sure you do every step right. But once you know all those steps and have everything kind of prepared and have them all listed somewhere, then it's not a big deal.
Yeah, definitely take some notes because it's a lot.
Yeah, you don't have to rethink everything every time. Our next question comes from Ram Pandapus. Is it possible to design a successful and fun multiplayer game that, 1, doesn't trigger the anger and frustration that leads to toxic behavior, and 2, doesn't tend to attract toxic people in the first place?
You played Words with Friends.
Yes.
I've never had trouble with Words with Friends.
Have you only played with friends?
I played randos.
I did play Words with Jerks, and everybody was kind of a jerk.
That's where they kind of, they self-select,
Yeah, people are like, well, should I play Words with Friends? Oh, I'm a jerk. Well, I guess I'll play Words with Jerks.
Yeah. Well, I think we were talking about this yesterday, I think. The problem with emotes even. So even when developers restrict your language use to just predefined emotes, people find ways to use them, basically using sarcasm to harass people.
Yeah, so on the podcast, my brother and me, they talked about how great it would be to have have different types of car horns that express different emotions. So right now we just have the sort of like, I'm angry or
It's just
get
a
out of my
scream,
way.
right?
But if you had a car horn that said great job, then you could, like if you see somebody pull off a sweet traffic move, you could tell them great job, right? Except it would only be used sarcastically, right? Like
you drive by an accident, you'd be like, great job.
Yeah.
Hip, 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 hip.
Yeah.
So
or somebody cuts you off, you're like, great job.
Right.
Great job.
Yeah, I
you
don't,
can't, you just can't.
I do think it is totally possible to do. I think it's
Does
just,
Words with Friends let people talk to each other?
I believe so. Pretty sure.
I don't know. Maybe not.
So the problem basically comes down to the fact that most people, when they're architecting one of these games, are worried about the game. They're not necessarily worried about architecting the social system that goes around it. And so as a result, because less time, it's kind of like what we talked about with studio stuff. Like we put a ton of energy into architecting the studio culture that we're trying to build here and how everything works. And that's what makes it at the end of the day start actually working really well, versus if we didn't do that and we're just really concentrated on, say, the games, or like trying to pump through a bunch of new production assets or whatever else. It's just the case that because we're not necessarily focusing there, that would slip into some other thing entirely. So I do think it's possible. I think it's really hard. And I think it's really hard because games as a general like risk vehicle are already extremely risky things and really hard to make. Just making a multiplayer competitive real-time game, as sort of what sounds like the example here, is so hard that if you're like, yes, we want to ask people to game devs to put in the time to necessarily craft their community in a way that can make it be positive, but it's also kind of a hard ask because they need to make
But to me, it's one of those things. Like I've seen this argument that people I put up on the internet just about comments and blogs and that kind of stuff too, right? Which is that it's going to take some work to do this properly, but if you're not doing that, but you actually have an ethical responsibility as a person who's creating a community, because if you make a game with an online community, you have created a community. You have allowed people to interact with each other using your platform, and if you designed it in such a way that toxicity is either just expected or super easy or becomes sort of the dominant form of behavior,
then you did that.
You're the asshole. Right? And there's actually a whole blog post it's just called like "You're the asshole" or something like that. That's about exactly
That's awesome.
But yeah, I think about this a lot because of doing all the web dev stuff. There's so much of it is just defensive programming, where the question I always have to ask my brain is, okay, how is somebody going to try to break this or try to get into the system that I made in an inappropriate way because they're being an asshole, right? This is a different kind of somebody being an asshole, but it's the same. It's exactly the same problem. And so most of my, or not most, but a very substantial fraction of my development time, and even the things that guide my decisions about what to make and how to make them, what kinds of features we can have, are dependent on my always paying attention to what I think people are going to do to try to ruin it. And that means that I don't make design decisions ever with anything I'm doing as if people aren't going to be assholes. Right. And I think this is the problem. If you just design a game and just say, and never in your mind at any time crosses the thought, well, people are going to be assholes. How should this impact my design? Right. And it has to.
Because even if like 3% of people.
Yeah, it just takes a tiny percent to completely
that's enough to just ruin the experience.
Yeah. And, but this is like, if you look at any, and we talked about this a bit a week or two ago, when talking about like World of Warcraft and how they had their ranking systems or their sort of scoreboards for competitive matches, and how many of the metrics that are being used don't actually enhance. They aren't actually related to
the game mode,
and playing an actually good game.
And it actually encourages people to play badly and attack each other.
Right. But this obsession with scoreboards, like, because why put a scoreboard up, right? If you're the designer, you have to think, what is this scoreboard going to do, right? How is this going to let somebody be an asshole? That should always be the question you ask. Right. Anytime you create something that people can interact with or compete on, just ask, how is somebody going to be an asshole using this? And then take a step back and think, maybe I shouldn't. And I mean, scoreboards, I think, are a perfect example of this because they don't do anything positive, actually, right? Scoreboards create, and even like think about global scoreboards for things. All these do is create incentives for people to hack it to show off how much of an asshole they are, right? Yeah. It doesn't, and it can maybe make somebody feel like, ooh, I'm the best person, right? Which that's not a good thing for a person to be thinking.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, in a competitive team-based thing, it's weird to think about scoreboard that breaks down people's individual contribution, right? Because the one thing that matters is, did your team win? Right. So,
and it's largely impossible to, as we talked about, to find metrics that make it clear that you as an individual are had some big contribution to the team, to the team win.
Well, because again, it doesn't really matter if you won.
Yeah. And if there's true social interactions that people actually interact with each other and tell each other what to do, then you don't need these scoreboards that are telling you how well a person did, right? Because you're working with people as a team. So if they're fucking up, you're going to know that they fucked up. Right. And so, yeah, you just don't need those metrics. Or if you do need some metrics, again, identify the ones that matter, that people can use to make decisions and that aren't just arbitrary things that people get to.
I mean, the thing is, you could even point them to specific people too. Like, you don't necessarily need a team-based leaderboard that shows everybody's metrics compared to each other. You could just so League of Legends now has a thing where they rank everybody. So after your match, they'll basically give you a grade, like S+ down to D or something. But I don't think it's the case that nobody else can see your ranking for that game. But of course, they still have all the stats available, so you can infer it. Right. But I mean, that's an interesting way to do it, because a lot of the beauty of a lot of these metrics is that they do actually allow you to improve, especially in competitive games. Yeah. Where you can say, oh, I didn't do as well on damage or whatever else this game as I did maybe a previous game. But if they're put in the context of a comparison with everybody else, now it's a different thing entirely, right? It's not just about you sort of achieving mastery and figuring out where your weak points are. It's an opportunity, like you said, for someone to be an asshole. Yeah. So it's hard. I don't know.
I think it's part of it is being careful about the kinds of information that you throw out there. Because it really does. It also, I mean, even in PvE or player versus environment things, or cooperative things, having scoreboards for stuff it can be detrimental. And in games that like MMOs that have rating, like large group rating, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll have damage meters, which is like a little overlay on the screen that will show you a breakdown of how much damage everybody in the group is doing, or how much healing everybody is doing, or whatever. And sometimes that's useful in the sense that like maybe a certain boss needs to have a certain amount of damage applied to it overall, or else it
kills everybody.
It like kills everybody. You can't kill it fast enough or whatever. But at the same time, it encourages all these bizarre player behaviors. So for example, in World of Warcraft, they have a thing called flex rating, which is instead of having like a 10-man raid or a 20-man raid or whatever, you can have any number of people. And the difficulty of the raid goes up or down depending on how many people you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so what started happening then as a result of this is people look at the damage meters and they go, well, this person is dramatically underperforming. So if we kick them out, the raid gets easier and we still keep all of our strong people. Right. And so actually that person has made the raid more difficult by them being there, but they aren't contributing enough to account for the more difficult experience.
But of course, that's by the one metric that is visible.
Yeah.
Right?
So interestingly, flex rating was created as a mechanism to be more inclusive because they're like, oh yeah, for more casual groups who can't exactly manage to get 20 people to a raid every time. Now they can bring 16 or whatever. Right. But it actually created an exclusive community where only the top performers get invited to these kinds of raids.
It's one of those weird things. Like you
just got to think through the full
some part of it though is that
consequences.
you can't even know though sometimes. Like you honestly can't. I mean, so for example, take
but again, you can because like in this case, if your first question was,
wait,
how could somebody be an
people
asshole?
right.
Then and yeah, it's not to say you'll always spot it because they can be quite tricky, you know,
quite creative in their ways.
Yeah, and often you have to spot it after the fact by assuming that you didn't. I mean, you should always also assume that you didn't think of everything.
Right.
This is true.
I mean,
about
we had this
everything
with our random friend finder.
Yeah.
Except this tool because like if you go into Bscotch ID and you're a new person, we're like you need to be able to have a community immediately. So there's a random friend finder. So you press the button, you get paired up with literally someone who also said, "I would like a random friend." This is not.
You both opt in.
Yeah, you both opt in.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, like the very few reports we get from the Bscotch ID messaging system, because nobody shares messages on there, the very few reports we get follow the general pattern of the Bscotch ID robot connecting two people and says, "Hey, you've been connected with the Bscotch ID."
which again,
friend
both
finder."
people opted into,
And then
saying, I want a random friend.
and then someone just says, "Fuck you,"
and that's it.
and we're like,
But
"What
here's the
is
thing.
happening?"
Maybe we're the asshole because we don't screen those messages, right? Like the person receiving it, the message still goes through to them and they report it to us, right? So like there are certain scenarios, for example, your first handful of messages after being randomly paired up with somebody through the friend finder, where maybe we should be screening for those guys.
Yeah, right.
and we're not because the volume is so low,
Right.
That
The incidence is also
the
incredibly
incidence
low.
is very low.
Yeah.
But that's now a lesson that we've learned, so that when it comes to the next design of the Bscotch ID 2 system,
Right. But I think that was also
keep
one of
that
those
in mind.
things just to sort of point out that even if you think you foresaw how it was going to be,
Oh yeah, there's always something.
I didn't.
We're
I
like,
was
oh,
why
people are
would you?
both opting in.
Yeah.
They both want a friend.
It seemed like a good win-win situation. Apparently not.
But it's also one of those things that I think it's also hard to really be prepared for the depths of confusion that your users are going to face when they use your system, because you'll make a thing that seems so obvious about what's happening that you think nobody could possibly not understand what just happened.
Are you talking about how everybody fights with the support robot?
Yes, because it's actually a little more interesting than that even. So it's the same problem. Right? So in this case, if somebody just didn't understand actually like what it meant to opt into the friend finder, right? If they just clicked that button, they didn't really know what was happening, and then they came back and then saw this message saying, "Hey, you're now friends," right? But they didn't understand that they opted into that or they forgot about it. Then now they might feel like they're sort of like their privacy is being invaded in some.
And then
weird
further,
way.
they have a second message from someone they've never met that just says, "Fuck you."
Yeah, right. So there's a weird, like we are assuming sort of, this crazy hostility and stuff on the part of these people. And without a doubt, like you have to be an asshole just to say fuck you to anybody for no reason.
Sure.
But there's that other layer before that, which is just people really don't understand what the hell is happening. And so we've mentioned in the past that people get in fights with our autoresponder for our robot email, right? So all of our newsletters go out under the same email address. It's just an outbox only account. But it is a real email account, so it does technically have an inbox, right? So every once in a while I have to go in to do something like update the message or something, and I'll just do a quick scan of all the messages that are at the top of the list. And it is the case that about, I don't know, one out of every probably a couple hundred messages or something is somebody getting in this like back and forth fight with the robot, being really angry that this robot has emailed them. And then emailing the robot some like nasty message telling it to stop, but it's an automatically replying robot.
There's a button in the email that says unsubscribe, and they can just.
Well, no, and the top of the email that comes just says, "I'm a robot. This is an automatic reply," right? And usually people only go back and forth for 1 to 3 emails, right?
But I mean,
but here's the interesting thing.
emails.
I know it's complete lunacy, but the interesting thing, and I hadn't realized this before, was that we have to use these systems in things like Google Play, right? Because we have to provide an email address. Right. Google Play has to allow people to submit reports to us through whatever the hell system they use that does that. And these are actually really infrequent, so we kind of forget that these things are even happening. But those actually, they either send those users something sort of on our behalf, or they send them something that includes that email address in there, right? So these people either reply to it, but often what is happening is they submitted something to Google Play, and then some short time later, they suddenly get an email from our robot, but they don't understand there's a connection between those two things, right? Mm-hmm. And many people get fucking irate when they get emails they don't expect from addresses they don't know. Right. Like completely irate. And because I know I was scrolling through and about one out of every maybe few dozen of the emails in there were just from somebody saying, what is this? Like replying to the robot. Again, the robot says like, oh, this is an auto reply, whatever. But there's a tiny number of people getting emails from the robot and not understanding why.
So this is probably why, now that I'm thinking about it, like if you get a lot of the support emails now, so say you submit a bill or you submit a contact request from somebody, they'll oftentimes, when they send you an email back as a confirmation, they include your message in it. Right. And I used to think that was done. I mean, part of it is for the psychological reason that it's sort of like in customer service, it's been shown that if there's a mirror behind the customer service desk, that so the person sort of approaching the counter
they can
sees themselves, people are less of an asshole.
Interesting.
So my guess was that this confirmation thing was sort of that, where like if you send this really just like, angry email and then it gets sent back to your inbox,
right?
Then you're like, oh,
kind of.
Well, yeah. And I've actually
I think maybe it's that. Like maybe it's just to reduce confusion overall.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, I don't even know where these emails are coming from in terms of the robot problem.
Yeah, I don't know where those are coming from. It's some Google Play thing.
Okay.
But yeah, but this is I've actually seen this in when I've done my own or dealt with my own customer support stuff, outside the studio, trying to get something replaced or whatever. I've noticed a handful of systems recently have started doing a thing where the first message that you send out, when you get the reply back, it actually doesn't, it just says, this is the message you sent. Click confirm if you want to actually send this to support, right? So sort of giving you a second chance to take a look at the thing that you just wrote, which I think is probably something we should implement.
Make people think for a moment about their life decisions.
But again, it's throwing a mirror at somebody, right? Just give an opportunity to say like, oh shit, maybe I should take that down a notch, right? But I think this could be particularly clever given, people always say, if you're going to write an angry email, then just put it away, let it cool off, and then come back and look at it, because every single time you do that, you're going to be like, ooh, fuck, good thing I didn't send that, right? So if we also put a delay on it, so that if somebody submits a report, then we just, after like 2 hours, send it back and it says, hey, we received a report. It's not going to go into the queue until you confirm this. So
do you want to make any changes?
Do you want to make any changes? So that now people have a second chance. Right. Because that'll probably give them a better chance not to get off on the wrong foot.
It'd be funny,
don't get poisoned by people.
What we should do is keep a log of all the ones that we got before.
Oh, yeah, we'll log all the things. Yeah, we'll log all the
Sounds like a GDC talk.
That sounds good.
There's one final thing I would say about toxic multiplayer stuff, which is there are a handful of words that if people choose to deploy them to strangers on the internet only have one purpose, which is to piss someone off, right? And try to ruin their day. I'm a strong advocate for the idea that if anybody uses one of these words in an online gaming setting, they just get permanently banned from the game.
They are an asshole.
They just are an asshole.
There's no way around
It's not, well, I was having a bad day. No, you weren't. You're just being an asshole.
Yeah. Having a bad day just made it so that you had more trouble keeping the filter on.
Yeah.
Right?
Not my problem.
Your true colors came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The colors of an asshole.
Yeah. What's the next question?
All right. Next question is from Imcade. Who wins in an arm wrestle? And who drinks the most caffeine? And what game have you played the most of? So I feel like it's kind of a cheating sort of pack three.
Came out of nowhere.
Pack three questions in, there might be a connection between these. It's hard to say.
Hard to spot.
Is the person who's the most caffeinated likely to win an arm wrestling match?
It's possible. So for starters, who does drink the most caffeine?
I don't know.
It's kind of an equal.
It's pretty even. I do make really potent brew.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the thing though is that Seth occasionally gets a Red Bull from the store, but not like the tiny ones. I mean, I look at the small ones and it makes my face hurt because I just know what they feel like. But Seth gets the like 24
Red Bull
ounce
actually
ones.
is not really. I'm pretty sure it's not much more caffeine than coffee.
I don't know what the fuck is in
There's
it. but
other
it, like,
there's other stuff
really
in it.
does not feel good on my brain. I mean, there's a brief window for like 40 minutes where I'm
Well, you gotta
in.
nurse it. You gotta really sip it for like 3 hours.
So I don't partake in that, but I do the 5 hour energies and stuff. So there have been some days where on accident, because I forget that I've had a 5 hour energy, I'll have one, and then I'll drink like two cups of coffee here, which are of course very potent brew, and then I'm just really jazzed until about 3 p.m. and then
5 hour energies have a lot of caffeine in them.
Yeah, a lot of caffeine. But I think we're pretty even between all that.
Pretty even. Okay.
As far as arm wrestling, I'm pretty sure Seth would win.
So maybe we should have some kind of like a leaderboard or like a scoreboard. Who can drink the most caffeine?
Yep.
Someone's gonna die because
Someone will die. That is a drug.
Be
that
careful
will
how you
kill
design
you.
stuff.
I'm pretty sure Seth would win an arm wrestling match. His arms are the size of cannons.
That seems likely.
So that is what it is.
So I've been having a problem in the gym lately,
What's that?
which is
We ran out of weights.
Did you pee
I
on the
ran out
floor?
of weight. I've been lifting with the B Scotch crew, which, with the exception of Sam, is mostly people who haven't been lifting extensively, and everybody's now starting to lift, which is awesome. But there's a little bit of catch up to do. So if I try to use free weights, I need a spotter, and I can pretty much only have Sam spot me. And so I've switched to using the machines, and I don't have any more numbers to.
You max them out.
Yeah, so I can't actually improve, which is good because maybe now everybody can catch up.
That's true. We got to put a cap on you.
I'm stuck.
Yeah, I think you've reached like an acceptable plateau. Probably.
Isn't that? Yeah. I was like, well, maybe now's a good time
Maybe
to
this
stop.
is an optimal stopping sort of situation where if you run out of weights that could be lifted,
You'd lifted.
maybe that's
You did it.
maybe we've
You
done
did. You did
sufficient.
lifting. All right. So then the final question is, what game have you played the most of
It's like an ever sort of scenario.
ever?
Probably League of Legends.
Yeah.
Definitely for me. Did a lot of that.
For me, it would definitely be World of Warcraft
Yeah.
in terms of total hours.
Yeah.
Or rather days.
Adam,
I don't actually.
yours is much more normal.
Adam kind of bounces around a lot.
Yeah, but I do kind of binge play sessions with my
Terraria,
wife on
probably?
certain things.
Yeah.
So with my wife, I played that fuck ton of Terraria, but it still only adds up to like 100 hours or
So
something.
when that new Stardew Valley multiplayer comes out, I'm gonna disappear for like 4 days.
Wait, they're doing Stardew multiplayer?
Yeah. For like end of the year, early next year, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna take vacation.
Sounds like a good plan.
Or just take a 3-day weekend.
Yeah,
I
that's
guess.
good. Yeah, that's a good couples game.
Mm-hmm. And apparently you can marry them in game. I was like, yes, sign me up.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I'd
Married my
say-
wife twice.
I'd say with the exclusion of World of Warcraft, because I actually haven't played WoW much since like 2013. So probably my most recent slate would be EVE Online as number 1, Kerbal Space Program as number 2,
Yeah, I
and
do.
Rocket League as number 3.
Yeah, I do have a lot of Kerbal
Basically
Space.
anything related to rockets, I'm
Good to go.
I'm all in on.
Yeah, I just don't play video games very much.
Funny.
I guess.
Yeah, you're too busy learning
Mm-hmm.
stuff,
Mm-hmm.
becoming a better person.
Mm-hmm.
All these sort of other hobbies
Mm-hmm.
that you can do.
Yeah, I was reading about statistics all weekend, which is pretty fun. It's been a while since I've
Sounds like a thrill of
said
minute,
too many
Adam.
statistics. But it was funny too, because last night after we got home from the thing, from the eclipse, and I was just fucking exhausted.
Yeah, it was really put out.
And yeah, my wife was working on some of her stuff, and I sat down and I fired up Steam, and I was kind of looking at the list, and I was just like, I'm gonna go read some statistics. So I did that instead.
Yeah,
Nice.
Just none of it struck my fancy.
This is why I have a tendency to just play one game real hard as a hobby, because I don't like that feeling of going to my giant list of games and then just being like, oh, like what do I want to? Because there's a starting cost. Like you got to learn the game and get good at it and stuff. And so I'm much more inclined to just go real deep on a game for a really long time.
I like to go real shallow on a bunch of games, but then mostly not play any of them.
And then read statistics.
And then read statistics.
Interesting video gaming strategy.
Yep.
All right, next question comes from Skode.
Cool.
Skoad. Those things like a sky toad.
Yeah.
Skode says, do all y'all think that an eventual update can bring a game back from the grave? Or do you think a bad game is bad forever?
This is interesting. So we actually, we had an interview with Games Industry. There'll be an article probably sometime this week about Crashlands, about the 500,000 units milestone. And one of the questions the interview asked, really good question. He said, he asked, how many updates we put out last year. And as you guys know, from listening to the podcast, so we only managed to put out 2 big updates to Crashlands. And a lot of the reason was because we essentially chose over the last year to focus all of our design and development efforts, not on the game, but on the studio. And that just necessarily meant that we didn't get to put out as much stuff. And we still have this huge list. We came up actually with more things a couple of days ago, of more fun stuff to do.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of the questions he asked was, do you think that, overall hurt the sales of the game? And my answer is yes, 100%, absolutely. Because featuring comes with updates. So they kind of get partnered together. So you can trigger things like visibility rounds. You can get iTunes to sort of maybe pay attention again.
You can do
all this
sales.
Stuff. You can do sales, all these things that sort of without the news. So you can't do that without anything having had happened. So in that case,
the interesting thing about updates though is they don't actually help you sell the game like just to players, right? There's no because a player who hasn't played your game before can't understand the value of the thing you updated.
Right.
It's really the featuring that comes with
the
the
featuring update. Because the store wants to have the newest, fanciest, shiniest stuff, right? And so what you're actually doing is when you make an update, you're making an update for the store.
Yeah.
Even more so than your players.
Yeah. So, there's that element to understand about it. But I do think it's the case that it's not going to be one update. And I think this is probably one thing that when we certainly found this with Quadrupus Rampage was the first one. But it's just not the case that you're going to have, if you have a game that's sort of floundering, that there's going to be one update that does it. Because the reality is, and we were talking about this just actually in a similar way with the podcast, you need a certain level of social proof with your game before people will necessarily even just buy it if they show up on your page. And so if your game is floundering super hard and you put an update out, maybe you get some more store eyeballs, until you hit a point where the game just sort of generally has an air of credibility to it and quality to it, it's really hard to have that sort of finally be a self-sustaining little thing that just kind of chugs along the background. So it's probably not very helpful to think about it as like a single update thing so much as saying, does this game have the potential for becoming a sort of lifelong product for our studio or for our team? And if so, what would be reasonably probably required for that? So in the case of Quadrupus, it took 8 weeks of follow-on dev in a game that took 12 weeks to make.
Yeah.
We almost doubled our development time in the tail because the game was not making very much money at all. And it wasn't until the third update we did, which was all the pets, that finally the game was making enough money where we were like, okay, we don't know what the hell else to do. This is good enough. We hit sort of a threshold is good enough. And so I think sitting down and really determining what those markers are for your
But that's
team.
also a different thing because that's the free to play. In the case of the free to play model, it's now saying you haven't actually changed the success of people playing your game. Mm-hmm. You've just changed how easy or likely it is that people playing your game are going to give you money as a consequence, right. Which is a different thing than if you've gated access to the game from the pay upfront model, mm-hmm. because now you have to actually prove to people that's worth paying you first and getting the game. Right. And so I think I think it's much easier to sort of pull some value out of a free to play game, assuming you already have players.
Yeah. They're more sort of update friendly, right? Yeah. Continued development friendly.
Yep.
So I think it's just sort of that game to play, which is, if you're on Steam or you're on Google Play or whatever else, all these platforms now allow you to talk directly to your reviewers. So if there's someone who has a big chunk of feedback about the game, when you update the game to integrate their feedback and maybe fix the rough edges that they found, you should let them know. Especially if you only have a handful of reviews, you basically need to do everything you can to, when you have an update, not just publish the update, but to let everybody know who maybe didn't enjoy the game because of that particular thing so that they can potentially make a revised review. Because it's all those little pieces.
Yeah, if you get 30 reviews and you can turn 5 of them around with a good update.
Then it's incredible, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I think, and a lot of things people don't realize is that early on, especially when you're dealing with smaller numbers on things, nothing you do is a scalar activity. Nothing you do is something that on a broad level will have a big impact. You have to do all this, frankly, very grindy, almost hustling type of work, where you're going and you're fixing very specific problems for very specific people and letting those specific people know things. None of that is scalable in a easily automated way, or it's just a shitload of work for those first people and for that first sort of bit of success. So I think, making those updates and really talking to your team and doing some contingency planning about what happened to make this not successful in the first place, and then what you can do to potentially make that happen, and then if it's worth it.
Yeah, always think about the opportunity cost, because you're going to be throwing dev time after, converting something you've done into a success. Mm-hmm. And that dev time could be used to be working on the next project, taking what you learned from that one and incorporating the new thing. But it, of course, also takes a lot more time to make a new game than it does to update an existing one. And so you have to, on the other hand, that also makes it really easy to think, oh, it'll just take a little bit of time to update this, so I should do that. Right. But
it's
that
a
adds
trap.
up. Yeah, it's a trap that you can get into.
Yeah, and it's also the case that you should always be asking why when it comes to if you make a game and you launch it and it is dead in the water. It might be the game, it might be your marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not just the case that patching a game by itself does anything.
Yeah, and why would you think that it would?
Yeah, because if nobody's playing it and then you patch it, you've patched it for nobody, right? So, and actually, we were just looking at the other week. We were looking at Brigador, which is an interesting case study. It's made by this buddy of ours who we've seen at like every convention we've gone to. And it's
there talks on the GDC Vault, I believe, too.
Yeah, so at GDC they talked about how badly their game did. Yeah. And then just by chance we were cruising around Steam Spy and we noticed that, what was it, a couple months ago or something?
Back in July, I think.
Just enormous spike. Just the number of players just blasted into.
They went from like 30,000 to 180,000 in 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. And so, and this was actually, it seems what we've been able to gather is this is due to various marketing opportunities and efforts that they went through
and getting into the Humble Monthly and doing
so they basically sort of
relaunch.
They basically pulled out all the stops.
And a huge update they launched at the same time.
Yeah. So they did so many things at once to try to resurrect the game that it was almost like an entirely new game and an entirely new launch.
They were like, boof. Yeah. Right. I mean,
yeah. And so,
big move.
But again, like had they just made that patch and just did that only, it probably would have done nothing, right?
Yeah, but here they had a bunch of news press. They had like PC Gamer and a few other things covered it.
They went into the Humble Monthly.
Yeah, they paired the timing with the Humble Monthly so that at the same time they're getting this huge boost in new people, they'd also put out this big update so that people were talking about it all over the place.
So now there's social proof on Steam. You see all of a sudden there's thousands and thousands of simultaneous players playing the game right now. So you must think, oh yeah, I'll give it a try, right? And so all these things kind of compound and work together to create this perfect storm of resuscitation. You know? So it is totally possible, but you can't just put all your eggs in one basket.
It's always it's really hard as a dev to make that call too, because
there's no right answer.
There's no right answer, and you actually just never know. I mean, and you look at a game like Terraria, for example, that with continuous dev, which is what they've been doing now for. I don't know how long games been out. 5 years or something.
Yeah, at least maybe more than that shit.
But with continuous dev on that, they've continued and continued and continued to grow that game to the point where it's just like it's a monster. It's a monster at this point.
Well, and interestingly, that also entrenches the game in terms of its where it occupies in the market, like the competitive space that it's in. Because if somebody else makes a game that is like Terraria, they can't compete on the level of content.
Exactly.
Like, there's just
5 years worth in one game.
You're 5 years behind.
And this was a call we made with Crashlands. We were like, there's stuff like multiplayer, which we've talked about before, how it would require basically a whole nother year of dev, if not more, of rebuilding the damn game in order to make it go. And we just decided that because we don't know what the heck would happen, we'll just take all the crazy stuff we learned from this launch, which was a ton, and this dev, and just move forward. And that's an uncomfortable decision to make because you just don't know what the other future could be.
Yeah, which isn't to say that Crashlands won't be receiving updates. It's that's not where all of our attention is. So
those will be focused on different kinds of purposes.
Yeah,
right?
so they will be smaller. They will be sort of more spread out. But yeah, so it's hard. Yeah. All right, so that's all the time we have. And we'd like to thank our studio wrangler, Monique, for putting this episode together, and our producer, Fat Bard, for making us sound good, and the B-Scotch dev team, Andy, Tifa, and Sher, for continuing to build stuff. Special thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord up and running. And, of course, we'd like to thank our listeners for coming back every week to check us out. Also, if you'd like to get more involved in the Butterscotch community, hop into our Discord server, which is at bit.ly/bsdiscord. Come say hi. We're in there. We're just hanging out. We might say hi back. We're pretty busy, so we don't see every message, but, we pop in there from time to time. And also, as we mentioned earlier, we have a B-Scotch mailbox. So if you'd like to send us 5 pounds of candy, you can do that at mailbox.bscotch.net.
Or just a nice note.
We also accept notes that are attached to 5 pounds of candy. So, whatever you want to do.
Attached to 5 pounds of candy.
If you want to also send us 5 more pounds of candy next to the first 5 pounds, we will
duct
also
tape it together.
We will also accept that. Also, we do depend on these reviews to get new listens, as Sam was talking about, and we're in the middle of a big review push to try to get 100 reviews on Apple Podcasts. So if you have an account if you have an Apple account, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or whatever, help us out by going over to bit.ly/CwB Apple and give
bonus
us
points for making them hilarious.
Yeah, we will do a reading of some of them in the future. So
yes.
but
your
only
creative writing
but
camp
only
on.
if they're hilarious.
Yeah.
So, you know,
So-
no pressure though.
So, and of course, thank you all in advance for taking the time to do that. It really does help us out a lot, and it means a lot. So, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.